As Germany collapsed in 1944, loyalty was survival, and yet one nurse chose something far more dangerous: compassion. Her name was Marguerite Hoffmann, 34 years old, a woman whose hands had become instruments of mercy in a world that had forgotten the word. She had treated over 300 men that month alone. Most would not leave alive. She knew this. They knew this. And still, every morning, she returned to the blood-stained floors of the makeshift hospital near Frankfurt. The facility had once been a school. You could still see the alphabet painted on one wall in the children's ward, now filled with soldiers missing limbs, their screams echoing where laughter once lived. Marguerite walked these halls with the mechanical precision of someone who had learned to turn off feeling. It was the only way to survive. She no longer believed in the Reich's promises of victory. Those grand speeches about the 1,000-year Reich seemed obscene now, played over crackling radios while men bled out on tables made from classroom doors. She believed in gauze, morphine, and getting through each day without thinking too much, without remembering the faces of the ones she couldn't save, without asking why. The war had a way of reducing everything to the immediate: the next breath, the next wound, the next death. On October 12, 1944, a convoy of refugees arrived from the east. Soviet forces were advancing like a dark tide, swallowing villages, towns, entire regions. The refugees came in waves, hollow-eyed, mud-covered, carrying whatever they could salvage from their former lives: a clock, a photograph, a child's doll with one arm missing. Among them, hiding behind a wooden cart in the hospital courtyard, was a child. Marguerite almost didn't see her. The girl was small, maybe 7 years old, rail-thin in a way that spoke of months of hunger. Her hair was matted, her dress torn and filthy. But it was her eyes that stopped Marguerite mid-step. Those eyes held a terror so pure, so absolute, that it cut through all the professional detachment Marguerite had built around herself. The girl clutched a torn blanket and didn't make a sound, not a cry, not a whimper. She had learned, as so many had learned, that silence meant survival. Marguerite approached slowly, the way you might approach a wounded animal. She knelt in the mud, ignoring the cold seeping through her uniform. "What's your name?" she whispered. The girl's lips moved, but no sound came out. "It's all right," Marguerite said, though nothing was all right. "Are you hungry?" A tiny nod. So small, it was almost imperceptible. Marguerite reached into her pocket and pulled out a piece of bread she'd saved from breakfast. The girl's eyes fixed on it with an intensity that broke something inside Marguerite's chest. But the girl didn't reach for it. She was waiting for permission. Or perhaps she'd learned that reaching for things could get you killed. "Take it," Marguerite said softly. The girl took the bread with trembling fingers and ate it so quickly she nearly choked. Marguerite placed a hand on her back, felt the sharp edges of her spine through the thin dress, and then she saw it. Sewn crudely into the inside of the girl's collar, where someone had tried to hide it, was a small yellow star, partially torn away, but unmistakable. The child's name was Miriam, and she was everything the Reich wanted gone. Margaret's heart hammered in her chest. She looked around the courtyard. No one was watching. Not yet, but they would be. Someone always watched. The Reich had turned neighbor against neighbor, friend against friend, until trust itself became a weapon. To report her would mean safety. A commendation, perhaps. Proof of loyalty. In a time when loyalty was measured in denunciations and blood, to help her meant treason. It meant execution. It meant her own name added to the lists of enemies of the state. Marguerite looked at the girl's face again, saw her childhood friend Eva in those features. Eva, who had disappeared in 1936. Eva, who Marguerite had been too afraid to ask about. too afraid to remember. She made her choice in the space of a heartbeat. "Come with me," she whispered, "quickly, and don't make a sound." That night, Marguerite led the girl through the empty hospital corridors. Every footstep echoed like a gunshot. Every shadow seemed to hide watching eyes. The girl followed silently, as if she'd become a ghost already, something insubstantial enough to slip between the cracks of this murderous world. The basement storeroom was cold and damp, lined with shelves of medical supplies that were running dangerously low. In the corner, behind boxes of bandages and bottles of iodine, Marguerite arranged blankets into a makeshift bed. It wasn't much. It was barely anything, but it was hidden. "You cannot make a sound," Marguerite said, kneeling to look the girl in the eyes. "Not during the day. Not when people are here. Do you understand?" The girl nodded. Her eyes were so old. Children shouldn't have eyes that old. "What's your name?" Margaret asked again. Margaret asked again. This time, the girl whispered, "Miriam." "Miriam?" Marguerite repeated softly. "I'm Marguerite. I'm going to try to keep you safe, but you must do exactly as I say." Margaret Hoffman had not spoken to a Jew in over a decade. The last one had been her childhood friend, Eva Rosenberg. They'd been inseparable as girls, playing in the park, sharing secrets, planning futures that would never come. Then came 1935, and the laws. Eva couldn't attend their school anymore. Marguerite's parents forbade her from visiting. The friendship died not with hatred but with fear. The quiet cowardice of ordinary people who told themselves they were just following the rules. Marguerite never knew what happened to Eva. One day, the Rosenberg house was simply empty. The windows dark, the doors sealed. Neighbors whispered. No one asked questions. Asking questions was dangerous. Now, 12 years later, in a basement that smelled of disinfectant and decay, Marguerite was being given a chance at something she didn't deserve. Redemption. Or perhaps just the opportunity to become the person she should have been all along. For 3 weeks, Miriam lived in that basement. Marguerite brought food after dark, bread stolen from the kitchen, soup saved from her own dinner, an apple she'd traded her cigarette ration for. She taught the girl German words and phrases, preparing her for a world where her accent might give her away. She told her stories to keep her quiet during the day, during the Gestapo inspections that came with increasing frequency. They were small moments, lit by candlelight and wrapped in fear. But they were human moments, real moments. Miriam learned to smile again, though it was a cautious thing, always ready to vanish at the sound of footsteps overhead. Marguerite brought down a book one night, a fairy tale collection that had somehow survived in the children's ward. She read to Miriam in whispers, both of them knowing the bitter irony of happy endings in a world that had none. But kindness leaves traces. Kindness requires resources. And in a war where every scrap of bread was accounted for, where every missing bandage was noted, someone would eventually notice the discrepancies. In the hospital office, SS Sturmbannführer Klaus Richter sat reviewing supply ledgers with the methodical attention to detail that had made him valuable to the regime. He was 43 years old, a former accountant from Munich who had found his calling in the machinery of state terror. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His power lay in his patience, his ability to spot patterns, anomalies, the small inconsistencies that revealed guilt. "Your morphine stores are low," he said, running his finger down a column of numbers. "Your bread rations are insufficient for the recorded patient count." The hospital administrator, a nervous man named Vogel who sweated even in winter, stammered excuses. "The bombings, Herr Sturmbannführer. Supply lines are disrupted. We're doing the best we can with..." "Or someone is stealing," Richter interrupted, his voice calm as ice. He closed the ledger slowly, deliberately, and looked up at Vogel with eyes that missed nothing. "I will be conducting interviews with your staff. All of them. Starting tomorrow." Marguerite overheard this conversation from the corridor. Her blood turned to ice water. She forced herself to keep walking, to maintain the appearance of normalcy. But her hands shook as she changed a soldier's bandages. That night, she sat at a desk in the darkened hospital, carefully falsifying supply logs. She matched her handwriting to the administrator's, changed numbers, added false requisition orders. Her hands cramped. Ink smeared. She was good at this, too good. War made criminals of everyone. She thought she'd hidden every trace. She hadn't. The young orderly, Hans Kepler, 22 years old and eager to prove his loyalty to the Reich, had begun to notice things. Nurse Hoffman working late. Nurse Hoffman in areas of the hospital she had no reason to visit. Nurse Hoffman with flour on her uniform when the kitchen had been closed for hours. He appeared in the doorway of the office one night, startling her so badly she nearly knocked over the inkwell. "Working late again, Sister Marguerite?" His voice was neutral, but his eyes were not. Margaret closed the ledger quickly. "Just finishing reports." Hans's gaze lingered on her face, searching for something. Guilt, fear, confirmation. He said nothing for a long moment, then turned and walked away. But Margaret knew. She knew he was watching now, and being watched was the beginning of the end. SS Sturmbannführer Klaus Richter was not a screaming fanatic. He didn't wear his ideology on his sleeve like the young street thugs who'd thrown rocks through Jewish shop windows in the early days. He was worse. He was patient, methodical. A man who believed absolutely in the righteousness of his cause and had the intelligence to be truly dangerous. He began his interviews the next morning. One by one, staff members were called into a small room and questioned. What did they know? What had they seen? Were they loyal? Prove it. When Marguerite's turn came, she walked into that room with her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. Richter sat behind a desk, his uniform immaculate, his expression unreadable. "Nurse Hoffman," he said pleasantly. "Please, sit." She sat. "You've been with this facility since June, correct?" "Yes, Herr Sturmbannführer." "Excellent work, from what I understand. Dedicated, tireless." He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "You work night shifts sometimes, yes?" "When needed." "And during these night shifts, have you noticed anything unusual? Anyone taking supplies? Behaving suspiciously?" Marguerite forced herself to meet his gaze. "No, sir." "Interesting." He opened a ledger, because the night shift reports tell a different story. Footsteps in empty corridors. Lights in the basement when no one should be there. Supplies that vanish and reappear. He looked up at her. "What do you make of that, Nurse Hoffman?" I don't know, sir. Perhaps mistakes in the logs. Or, I don't believe in mistakes," Richter said softly. "I believe in patterns. And someone here is establishing a very clear pattern." The interview lasted 20 minutes. Each question a trap. Each answer weighed and measured. When Marguerite finally left, she was shaking so badly she had to lean against the wall in the corridor. By late 1944, even whispers of disloyalty could lead to execution. The Gestapo didn't need evidence, only accusation. Trials were brief, if they happened at all. A denunciation. A short investigation. A bullet in the back of the head, or a noose in a prison courtyard. The machinery of death had become efficient, industrial, routine. Trust was a luxury no one could afford. The Reich had weaponized suspicion, turned it into a tool of control. Mothers informed on sons, children on parents. The entire society had become a prison where the guards were everywhere and invisible. That night, in the basement, Marguerite told Miriam, They couldn't stay. The girl had been drawing on the wall with a piece of charcoal, a house, a tree, two stick figures holding hands. The simple art of a child who still believed, somehow, in houses and trees and people who held hands. "When can I go outside?" Miriam whispered. "Soon. Are they coming for us?" Margaret had no answer. She pulled the girl close, felt her small body trembling. And then the footsteps. Heavy boots on the wooden stairs. Coming down. Closer. The sound every fugitive fears. The sound that means discovery and death. Marguerite moved with desperate speed, covering Miriam with blankets, pushing boxes in front of her hiding place. The girl disappeared into shadow, became invisible. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. A long pause, a shadow under the door. Marguerite's heart stopped beating. Time stopped. The world stopped. Then the footsteps retreated back up the stairs. Someone had come to check, or perhaps just to smoke a cigarette away from the officers. Or perhaps they knew and were giving her one last chance. She would never know. Marguerite exhaled a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. When she pulled away the blankets, Miriam was crying silently, tears streaming down her face, her body shaking with suppressed sobs. "We can't stay here," Marguerite whispered. "Not anymore." In war, acts of resistance are rarely grand. They are small, quiet, and often shared by ordinary people who make extraordinary choices in impossible moments. Marguerite approached Ingrid Schumacher, an older nurse who'd worked at the hospital since before the war. Ingrid was 51, widowed, with lines on her face that told stories of grief and endurance. They spoke in the storage room. Voices barely above whispers. "You're insane," Ingrid said. "If they catch you, they'll catch us both if she stays. Will you help me or not?" Ingrid closed her eyes. In that moment, she was weighing everything. Her life, her safety, the risk. And then she opened her eyes again and said, "What do you need?" Over the next 2 days, they prepared. Marguerite forged medical documents by candlelight, copying signatures she'd memorized, creating a fictional patient with a fictional illness. Ingrid stole a child-sized nurse's uniform from storage, something left behind from before the war. They cut Miriam's hair short, bandaged her head to cover her features, rehearsed what she should say if anyone asked questions. October 31st, 1944. Allied bombers had hit Frankfurt the night before. The city was chaos, fires still burning, rescue crews digging through rubble, medical evacuations happening in a constant stream. In the chaos of war, one small patient being transferred west would barely be noticed. Supposedly infected with typhus, supposedly in quarantine, supposedly being moved to a facility in mines. All lies, but lies that might save a life. Dawn came cold and gray. Marguerite wheeled a covered gurney through the hospital corridors. Miriam lay beneath white sheets, her eyes closed, barely breathing, playing dead or dying or somewhere in between. Hospital staff rushed past, too busy with their own emergencies to notice, too tired to care. They loaded the gurney into a medical truck. Other wounded were already inside, real patients groaning in pain. Ingrid drove. Marguerite sat in the back, her hand resting on the gurney as if checking vital signs, as if this were routine, as if her entire world wasn't balanced on this single moment. 15 kilometers from Frankfurt, there was a checkpoint. Wehrmacht soldiers and SS guards checking papers, looking for deserters, fugitives, anyone trying to escape west toward the advancing Allies. The truck slowed, stopped. Marguerite could hear her own heartbeat, could feel Miriam's tiny body tense beneath the sheets. This was it, the moment that would determine everything. An SS guard approached, his breath fogging in the cold air. Papers. Marguerite handed them over. Her transfer documents. Official stamps. Everything correct. Everything perfect. Everything forged. The guard examined them, squinting in the weak morning light. Where are you taking this one? Quarantine facility. Mainz. Suspected typhus. The guard's eyes narrowed. He approached the gurney, reached to pull back the sheet. I wouldn't, Marguerite said, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her. Unless you want infection. We've already lost 2 staff to it. The guard's hand hovered over the sheet. He looked at Marguerite's face, searching for deception. Found only a tired nurse doing her job. A long pause. The longest moment of Marguerite's life. Go, he said finally. The truck rolled forward. Marguerite didn't breathe until they were out of sight. When she finally lifted the sheet slightly, Miriam's terrified eyes stared back at her. Almost there, Marguerite whispered. But where was there? Where could a Jewish child be safe in a world that wanted her dead? They drove west until the sounds of war grew louder instead of quieter. American artillery. The front line. Chaos that could be salvation. In a forest near the border of Allied territory, Marguerite and Miriam walked alone. The truck had taken them as far as it could. Now there was only forest and fear and the thin hope that the girl might slip through to the other side. At a river's edge, Marguerite knelt before the girl one last time. She removed her own locket, a silver thing her mother had given her, with a tiny photograph inside, and placed it around Miriam's neck. Listen carefully, she said. Follow the river west. Stay hidden during the day. At night, walk toward the sounds of fighting. The Americans are there. They'll help you. Come with me, Miriam said, her voice small and desperate. I can't. If I disappear, they'll search. They'll hunt us both. But if I return and you're simply gone, they'll think you died or ran. They won't search as hard. It was a lie. They might search anyway. But it was the only hope they had. If anyone asks, your name is Anna. You're an orphan. From Dresden. Can you remember that? Anna, Miriam whispered. From Dresden. Marguerite embraced the girl one last time. Felt her thin arms wrap around her neck. Felt tears hers, or Miriam's, or both, wet on her face. Live quietly, she whispered. Miriam walked into the trees. She looked back once, her small figure silhouetted against the gray sky. Marguerite raised her hand in farewell. Then the girl disappeared into shadow, into history, into the uncertain future. Marguerite walked back alone. Returned to the hospital. Filed her report. The patient had died en route. The body had been buried in a field. War made such things common. No one questioned it. She never knew if the child lived, but she knew she'd done the one thing the regime feared most. She disobeyed. In a world built on absolute obedience, she had chosen mercy. It was a small act, but small acts accumulate. They add up. They matter. Marguerite Hoffmann survived the war. Barely. She was questioned 3 times by the Gestapo about the missing supplies. Once by the SS about suspicious activity. She never spoke, never broke, held the secret inside her like a stone. Hans Kepler, the young orderly, informed on others. Denounced a doctor for defeatist talk. Reported a patient for making jokes about Hitler. But he never denounced Marguerite. Perhaps he had no proof. Perhaps, in some small corner of his conscience, something stayed his hand. She would never know. The war ended in May 1945. Berlin fell. The Reich, that was supposed to last 1,000 years, lasted 12. The hospital was bombed shortly before the surrender. Richter died in the Battle of Berlin, shot while trying to flee. Ingrid disappeared in the chaos and was never heard from again. Marguerite survived and returned to a city that was mostly rubble and ghosts. She lived quietly in the years after. Found a small apartment in Bavaria. Worked as a nurse in a civilian hospital. Tried not to remember too much. The mind has ways of protecting itself, of burying the unbearable. On April 3rd, 1952, 7 years after the war ended, a letter arrived from New York. Foreign postage, careful handwriting. Marguerite's hands trembled as she opened it. The letter was in German, translated from English. It began, "Dear Margaret," the girl had lived, had made it to American lines, had been taken in by relief workers, eventually adopted by a Jewish family in New York, had grown up, married, built a life. You once told me to live quietly, but I cannot. I tell everyone about you. I am married now. I teach children. I have a daughter. Her name is Margaret. You saved not just my life, but all the lives that will come from it. You are the reason I breathe, the reason my daughter laughs, the reason goodness still exists in my memory of that time. Marguerite wept. She sat by her window and wept for the first time since the war. Not from sadness, but from something else. Relief, gratitude, the knowledge that it had mattered, that choosing mercy in a merciless world had made a difference. Tens of thousands risked their lives to save Jews during the Holocaust. Most of their names remain buried beneath rubble and silence. No medals, no monuments, no recognition. Just letters like this one. Whispered thanks in quiet rooms. Memories passed down through generations. History remembers the war, the battles, the generals, the great sweeping movements of armies and nations, but it rarely remembers the mercy, the small acts of defiance, the nurse who hit a child, the farmer who shared his bread, the teacher who forged documents, the ordinary people who chose, in their small corner of hell, to remain human. These stories exist in the margins, in the spaces between official histories, in letters that arrive years too late, in the names carved on memorials that most people walk past without reading. But they matter. They matter because they prove that even in the darkest times, even when the entire machinery of state and society is bent toward murder, individuals can still choose differently, can still choose mercy, can still risk everything for the life of a stranger. Margaret Hoffman never considered herself a hero. She lived quietly until her death in 1967. She never told anyone what she'd done, never sought recognition. The letter from Miriam was enough. But her name is recorded now at Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial in Jerusalem, among the righteous among the nations, those who risked their lives to save Jews. Their names are carved in stone, planted as trees, remembered when so much else is forgotten. Even in darkness, one act of kindness can defy an empire. This is not just Marguerite's story. It is the story of thousands like her, the hidden ones, the quiet ones, the ones who simply chose, when the moment came, to be decent, to be human, to save one life when the world was ending. And in saving one life, the Talmud teaches, one saves the entire world.